Welcome to the Married People Podcast, where we help you make marriage real, fun, and simple. Each week, we have honest conversations about one simple thing that can make your marriage better. Because when your marriage is better, everything's better. I'm CJ, and this week, we're talking about what to do if you're married to a dreamer. Now, my co-host Ted Lowe recently had a chance to sit down with the one and only Jon Acuff, a self-described dreamer. Jon Acuff is the New York Times best-selling author of 6 books, including his most recent book, Finish, Give Yourself the Gift of Done. Now, for over 20 years, Jon has helped some of the biggest brands in the world tell their story, including the Home Depot, Bose, Staples, and the Dave Ramsey team. He spoke to hundreds of thousands of people at conferences, colleges, companies, churches, and is featured regularly on national media like CNN and Fox News. So, needless to say, Jon is very busy, has huge aspirations, and like I said, is a self-described dreamer. So, what does that mean for his marriage, though? Well, that's what Ted's interview with Jon is all about. So check this out.
Jon, thanks for hanging out with us today, man.
Thanks for having me.
It's early in a place that they used to build missiles.
It's not that early.
It's not that early.
Like, room service had already knocked on my door, which I thought was like, dude, 9/11, you shouldn't be knocking to clean the room. Like, a lot of people
Not 9/11, the date, but like, don't knock at 9/11.
Yeah, it just was too early. I was surprised. I mean, I was up before then, but...
Yeah, I just didn't know if you were traveling in, if you needed sleeping a little bit today.
No, I'm fine.
No. Well, good. Well, thanks for coming. Yeah, we'd say we're at a place where they build missiles, basically with this church that took over a facility. It's massive.
It's really big. This room's huge.
The whole place is...
Cavernous.
Well, I'm excited to have you, dude. I know that you are super busy. You got a lot of things going on. You are always thinking, camping on the next idea, the next thing. But one of the things that I remember, and I got really excited about it a couple of years ago, it said Jon Acuff is going to write a book called Married to a Dreamer.
Sure.
So talk a little bit about that whole thing.
Yeah, so we just get that question all the time. Occasionally, Jenny will do Q&As with me at events. Like, if it's my event, she'll do a Q&A. I haven't done my own event in 5 years, and people will say, I remember this one guy was like, hey, he asked this really long question, like, how do you get your wife to support your dream? And she was like, money's nice. And that's all she said. And she was right. Like, and so I got excited, but I was like, oh, we're going to do a book about it, like announced it as a dreamer would. And then she was like, I don't want to write a book. Like, what are you talking about? So now people ask her all the time, like, hey, how's the book coming? And she's frustrated because it makes her look like she's lazy. Like, and they're like, you can do it. Like, people write us letters that are like, I just want to encourage Jenny to finish her book. And she's like, good. And I wrote probably 20,000 words of a book. So I'm not saying, like, there's definitely a chance that a PDF could come out or like an ebook. Like, I could 100% see Jenny and I doing that at some point because I think it's helpful. I think that it's a cause of a lot of tension. It's a cause of a lot of divorce because what happens, and there's guys like John Woodall, who we both know, like he's touched on this subject before. It's, he touches on a lot of subjects, but I've heard him talk about the tension if you're not sharing that dream, it's not that it stops, you just share it somewhere else. And like, there's all these things where like, and then you end up like, oh, this person gets me. And like, you just end up in a dark place. And so I still think it's an idea like that I would write, but I know Jenny wouldn't write the book because she doesn't want to go speak on it. And so she's kind of like, it'd be unfair. I wouldn't take a publisher's money and then not go talk about it.
Gotcha.
So
talk a little bit about that. Like, talk about some of the tensions to people because I've found, I don't know, that a lot of times dreamers are married to, I won't say non-dreamers, but I would say more grounded in reality.
Yeah, totally.
More than two dreamers together. I
think that's great. I think that can be awesome. I would say that's Jenny and I. I think what often happens is, so you've got, let's use the husband as the dreamer. It's like living with a fire hose of ideas. And it's like, I'm going to do this and this and this and this and this. And so then the wife, to get involved, asks questions. Woodall calls it the how versus wow. Like, there's a wow person, there's a how person. And so their strength is to go, well, how will that work? How will we make money? How will you support the family? And then the person that's the dreamer feels attacked. Like, they don't feel like, oh, you're using my strength to support me. They feel like, you don't believe in me. And so it becomes this huge, and to the wife's point of view, it's like, oh, great, your 70th idea, like this week. Like, let me put all my emotion behind it. So then a week later when I ask you, you've already forgotten. And so that, like, And especially like marriages when the husband's in their 40s, like I think the most dangerous time to lose your job or transition is between 40 and 45. Like I've watched more men like go amiss in those moments and get stuck for 10 years, for 15 years when they lose their job, it was their identity, and they're going to do something, I'm going to become an entrepreneur or whatever, and they just get in the murk. And so that's the concept. And, you know, kind of what, like when Jenny was saying money is nice, what she was saying is like, prove it. Like, do it. Like, she wasn't saying a ton of money, you have to have a ton of money. She was saying, when I see results, it's easier for me to support that. Like, so when I would tell her, I'm going to write a book, it wasn't really until I'm getting up at 5 a.m. before work, I'm watching less TV, I'm doing all the things that actually go into writing a book, that she was like, oh, wow, like of the 100 ideas, this is one that, like, I think he's really getting excited about this. Prior, it was just a what if. And so I think part of the dreamer's responsibility is to say, hey, I want to have this like crazy conversation. I don't need you to analyze it. I just want to talk. I'm not about to do it. Not about to mortgage the house. I haven't done anything dumb. I haven't made any big purchases that I'm about to reveal. Like, I just want to brainstorm. You're my favorite person. Let's talk. I think that's, and then the other thing is that I don't think your spouse is supposed to carry all that. Like, I think there's like 50 roles your spouse isn't supposed to have. Like, I think I can do a whole podcast on, like, guys are idiots who make their wife their accountability partner on their safe eyes or their covenant eyes. Like, you are an idiot. Like, I hope everyone who hears this gets frustrated, but it's true. You're just the dumbest person ever because you've now turned your wife into your warden. And the last thing she needs to get you've turned your wife into your warden. Like, the last thing she needs to get is a review of like what you looked at on the internet. Like, what are you going to call her up and be like, hey, I just want to let you know I'm at lunch, saw a hot girl, really lusted. Just needed to let you know. Hope this helps our marriage. And dude, there are a billion guys that read one poorly written book about lust and think this is the solution. And so I don't think your wife's supposed to be 100% your entrepreneur partner. I don't think she's supposed to be your person who checks on your lust. I don't think either spouse is supposed to be 100% the money accountability. I think it's every bit as toxic if you have to call your husband and say, hey, I'm making a $7 purchase. Is that okay? And then he has to approve it. Like, I just think that's
a reverse at my house.
Yeah, but like it's such a garbage relationship then. Like, now you're like, I just have to call the person who stands between me and something I enjoy. Like, and then they get to say, no, you don't get that. Like, that's, it's terrible.
That is the huge, I've always felt that way when I would hear people say, hey, you need to be 100% honest with each other. If you don't have honesty, you don't have anything. And then the whole, like, you've got the passcode to my computer and all that kind of thing.
We're created for community. So, like, I need other guys who get what I struggle with or whatever and can say, dude, that was dumb. Like, and and my wife needs to know other guys are asking that. Like, but I just think there's real danger there.
So you're all pro accountability. You're just thinking it's damaging, can be damaging to marriage.
Well, and just the idea of like, here, you hold this. Like, I've done something terrible, you carry it. Like, under the guise of honesty. Like, oh, I've been so honest. Your wife isn't your confessor. Like, or your husband isn't. And so I just, and I think the challenge is you can't then go, great, I get to hide stuff. The challenge is it has to be going somewhere. I just don't. And I believe in honesty and, obviously, but like, I just think that people do that so poorly.
Yeah. So in other words, it feels better to us, to be honest. It feels worse to them.
I've asked you to hold this terrible thing. Like,
so how does that connect with this whole idea of being a dreamer?
Well, I mean, I think part of it is having shared dreams. I think also it's not forcing your dreams on somebody else. I always tell people, your husband shouldn't 100% understand your dream because it's your dream, not his. And so I think it's really unfair when a wife who's really excited about something expects the same level of excitement for a husband who's wired differently. Like, so I don't look to Jenny to mirror exactly what I feel about something because she's not me and I'm not her. And so I think there's part of that freedom of going, your thing doesn't have to look like mine. Like, you don't, I don't have to say to you constantly, well, what's your dream? What's your dream? What's your dream? Like, her dream might be to stay at home with the kids, and that's awesome. Like, and that's more than enough, raising humans. And so I think you have to have freedom to let your spouse express what they care about in their own way.
Have their own dreams. Jon, talk a little bit about maybe in the beginning, as you guys were figuring this out, maybe you weren't great at it and how it's evolved. over time?
Yeah, I mean, I think that part of it is allowing your spouse to give you honest feedback. I think that there's a lot of marriages, we talk about family of origin, where your family you came from, the husband was the hero and the wife was the cheerleader. And so when the wife criticizes, the hero's like, what are you talking about? Like, you just mean rah, rah. And so I think there's a lot of marriages where the wife doesn't have freedom to say, hey, here's a thing I think that we should change or do differently. And so I think how it's changed for us is, I think part of my job as a husband is to shorten the distance between when Jenny tells me something that's true and when I believe it. Like, I think early in marriage, it was like, I'd be frustrated for days. And then now it's like 15 minutes where I'm like, that's crazy. I don't do that. And then I'm like, oh man, I totally, that's right. I should be smarter about that. So I think that's part of the maturing process, is having a space where your spouse gets to be angry or excited or honest or critical, but I think you miss the best parts of somebody if they only get to act a certain way, which is say, you're great. I think that's the best. If you look at couples that have made dumb decisions, often it's because one person doesn't get to say what they believe. And they might get to say at the end, I told you so, or I thought that would happen. But that's not helpful to anybody, because then they haven't had a voice up front and they're shaming their spouse on the back end. So that's kind of lose-lose.
So what closed the gap for you? You said I used to be a week and now it's, 15 minutes. Because that takes a lot of ego strength, I think.
Well, I mean, I think it was other guys who had the kind of marriages I want, guys that could lean on me and say hey, here's something to be smart about. It certainly, I don't think most of the things I've learned haven't been one day I got up and I was like, I'm doing life differently.
Exactly.
I wish I had that intelligence, but it's usually a relationship says, hey, this and this, be careful about. And I go, oh, okay. Or I have a bad situation where doesn't go well. And I go, okay, why did that happen? How does it not happen? A second, third time. I think part of it is just, seeing the value of what our spouses offer. That if I don't have a space where Jenny can really be fully her, then I miss all these great things. I heard a counselor once say, every man wants to know he's enough, and every woman wants to know she's not too much. And so the man wants to know his masculinity is enough, who he is enough. The woman wants to know she's not too much, and that she can be as big and as beautiful and as powerful as she's designed to be, and the man isn't overwhelmed.
Oh, wow. I love that.
Yeah, I'm pretty smart to remember that.
I love that.
I didn't say it. But I think that's really interesting, because it flips it on its head, where it's then you're trying as a husband to create space where your wife gets to be as loud and as beautiful and as powerful, and you're great with that because you already know you're enough. And so I think today it's 2018, so we'll be married 17 years in April. So I think that's part of it.
That's amazing. And giving her room and the space to be able to say that. A lot of times when I'm ever sitting with just a guy and he's struggling, what do I need to do? What's the next thing? And I'm say, well, what does your wife say? Because if you've got a wife,
oh yeah, 100%.
Especially if it's a believer. If you've got a wife that's a believer and you go, she is so wise. She is the expert on you.
Yeah. Well, and if the wife is she's 100% against it, you're well, okay, well, let's talk about that. Is it legitimate? Is it she's afraid? I say people hate that question though. They want to just be she doesn't understand. If they want to do it, if they're trying to make an impulsive, dumb decision, then they don't want to take the time to hear from their wife.
Give me an example maybe of you and Jeannie when you guys hit a space where she said, hey, John, you need to throw the brakes on this. And it you look back now and go, ooh, that was helpful.
I think when I first started working for myself, she would say to me, it feels like you're asking everybody to be your boss. She'd be like, you get to make the decisions. And out of fear, you're trying to make other people your boss, you're the boss. And I remember that because there was a time right around that time when a friend was doing a mastermind. And I was like, it'd be so great to be in a mastermind. I just don't have the time because I travel a lot. And I felt I heard this voice. I was like, oh man, it must be a bummer to travel so much. You must have a terrible boss. And oh wait, that's you. And so that idea of she was essentially saying, own your decisions. Take responsibility for the things you choose. Don't try to find a client. Don't try to find, a retainer thing that tells you how to live. you've lived under that for 15 years. Now you're in a new space, like, and you have to figure out that space. Another time she essentially quit working for me. Like, we ended up, when you go off on your own, the great temptation is you no longer have community. So like your spouse becomes your community. And so like, I'm asking her work decisions. I'm reviewing things with her. I never, when I had a job, when I was writing Home Depot advertising, I never called her 10 times a day and was like, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? But then if she's sitting right next to you or like down the hall, you end up, and so I think that was one where she was like, hey, I quit. I'm not going to be your assistant. I don't want to be your project manager. Like, I'm out. And so Do Over, one of my books, she read probably 8 times. Finish, she saw when it was pretty much done. Like, she's just in a good way checked out. And I thought, and I think there are couples that work really well together as an entrepreneur couple. I just think they're like unicorns. I think most of the time, the couples I meet are like, yeah, work is all we talk about. We go on date nights and we talk about building the business and the bills. And they're like, so I'm not saying it's impossible to do well. I just think it's super difficult.
I heard a stat the other day. I can't remember the exact number, but it is few and far between. It is unicorns that couples can work together. I know for us, Nancy and I used to travel together full time. So we said we were like married in dog years because we were spending so much time together. And we look back now and go, wow, we work terribly together.
Yeah.
And so they actually, there was a position open with married people, and my boss says, hey, what about Nancy? And I'm like, that's the worst idea I've ever heard in my life.
Doesn't work. I mean, again, like right now there's a couple listening that are like, have their own company. Like, you guys are dumb. Right. I'm not saying it's impossible. I just think it's very difficult and it's very rare.
Yeah. So getting your feedback or critique, I know Andy Stanley said to me one time, I had mentioned to him that I asked Nancy about my talks, and he goes, why would you do that? Why would you give a message and then ask Nancy? Because you're not wanting critique from her, you're wanting praise from her. Don't put her in that position. He said, if you were a chemical engineer, you wouldn't be going,
calling
hey,
her,
what do you think about this?
Or a plumber. Yeah.
Yes.
You wouldn't say like, hey, here's this plumbing I hooked up. What do you think? Yeah.
Jon, talk a little bit, like, okay, you're the dreamer. Talk to the people who are married to a dreamer. What's the best thing, people that are married to a dreamer, what can they do to support dreams but yet still be honest? I
think, I think it's to kind of pause. Like, I think most situations will dissipate on their own. If your spouse goes, I got this crazy idea, just say like, that's really interesting. And then just wait a week. Like a week later, it's not like it will have disappeared because the next one will have come. So I think not to treat every idea like it's a serious idea. I'd say 90%, 95% are going to be like what if spaces. And then I think, to be honest about what you need, like to say, hey, I love these conversations, but it makes me nervous that you're going to do this thing again. Most times a dreamer, it's not the first time they've done something. Like, I probably have 5 different business cards in my garage that I was like, oh, I'm doing this thing, I'm doing this thing, I'm doing this thing. Or like, and then to establish some ground rules. So like one of Jenny and I's ground rule is I can register a URL on GoDaddy, but if I haven't touched it for a year, I can't still have it. Like, I don't do any auto renew because if I haven't touched it for a year, it's not something I care about. So I think like figuring that out and having some like kind of simple ground rules, like, oh yeah, this is, this works for our family. This is smart. I think that's part of what you can do.
I love that. I think for me, it's always been, being a dreamer married to someone who's, again, more grounded. Told her, I said, I can't hear from you after I've just been vulnerable, given a message, or at the end of a project. It's harder for me to receive critique from her because you feel so vulnerable.
Sure.
So I was like, so before I give this talk the next time, I'm going to come back to you and say, hey, all right, now that I'm.
Yeah, my friend has a 24-hour window with his writing partner where he's like, hey, I don't want to hear anything for 24 hours because it's so fresh. So yeah, I think you just figure out, okay, the rhythm-wise, what helps us, what gives us the best shot at this working. I think you just think through it.
That's good. But we don't want to miss out on what they're going to bring, because that's the biggest tragedy.
I think I love being married to Jenny and her wisdom, and the reason I'd be like in a gutter. Like, the reason we've accomplished the things we've accomplished is because Jenny's great at going like, hey, here's how to really make it happen. Here's what we're going to do. I don't know that I would have written six books at this point if I didn't have somebody who was like driving the realism engine and going, this makes sense, this doesn't make sense.
How do you support her dreams? Because again, like you said, your dreams are different. How do you support her dreams?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it is, like I said, I don't try to make them mine. I don't measure her dreams by my expectations. I think I create space for her to do the things she wants to do. Like she went to Germany, Switzerland, and Singapore last year with a girlfriend. I went to Budapest the year before that. And so, I try to have a life and she texted me. She was like, hey, we're going to add Singapore. It's going to add a week. I was like, great, go for it. So I try to be really flexible that way where I can't travel for my job and then be like, what do you mean? You got to be home. And so I try to return that great favor she's given me in helping out with the kids. And then I try to not ask a lot of well, what are we doing next? What are we doing next? That's a frustrating question she'll say on a Saturday, this is it. This is what we're doing. We're hanging out. That it doesn't have to be this constant wave of excitement. And then she kind of helps me temper no, we don't need to do that thing. We've already done 5 of those things. We can just relax. We don't have to go crazy. And I have to be willing to accept that. And then just, I think not letting my stuff dominate the situation. So Do-Over was too dominating. She didn't need to read the book that many times. Finish, I barely talked to her about the book until it was really good. And she was like, oh, this is great. It didn't dominate our life. So it wasn't, the house didn't create Finish. It was my job, and then we launched it, and that was great. It wasn't. I think one way you support somebody else's dream is by not letting yours dominate everything. We had a counselor say, Jon and Jenny, you both have tremendous insight into Jon, and that was his way of saying Jon's not leaving any space for Jenny. So I try to leave space, I guess, is one thing I'd say.
How do you guys handle it on the road? Because again, I know you travel a lot.
So we're deliberate about it. The biggest thing Jenny taught me, she said, I was saying goodbye one night to my kids, and she was like, you're giving them all your shame and guilt. One of the biggest mistakes business travelers make is they go, I'm leaving, I'm so sorry. And kids don't even know to feel sad. The average kid doesn't even understand, oh, this is a terrible thing I should be sad about. Okay, I will if you're asking me. Kids reflect your emotions. She was like, you're giving them your guilt. When you leave, say, hey, I'll see you on Tuesday. Got to go to my job. It's awesome that I have a job. Versus doing this weepy goodbye thing that ruins the kid's week and just drives their emotions into the gutter. And so that was a huge change for me.
That's massive.
Yeah, and then tying what I do to when we're at Disney, I go, we're able to do this on a Tuesday in the middle of the week because I was in Oklahoma last week at an event. These are connected. Let me connect. Let me show you. The reason I'm home every day you get off from the bus is because some days I'm out of town doing events. And so I think that's a big part of it. I try, Zig Ziglar told me, when you can, get home before midnight, try to get home, be deliberate about that. There's some speakers that are I got to get in 2 days before to kind of settle. That's garbage. I never take the last flight because you're going to miss it. I take the second to last. And so next week, I'm going to talk to the NFL Players Association, and I'm thinking a 5 a.m. flight up because I want to, I'm speaking at 3, and I knew, okay, I can take a 5 a.m. flight that day, which will suck for me, and then I'll take another one the next day to get home at 5 a.m., but I'll do that so that I have more home time, so that it's not, and then when you're on the road, be on the road. When you're home, be home, So, and then taking I probably took 6 or 7 weeks of vacation last year. So when people are like, oh, you're gone all the time, it feels like that because I don't tweet when I'm home. I'm not hey, I'm in Nashville. Just wanted you to know I'm in Nashville. But when I'm in Atlanta, I might be hey, great time in Atlanta, so fun. So part of it's perception. And Jenny's dad traveled growing up, so that helps me. She has a background for that. And then I don't, every job has things you don't like in it. We sometimes like to pick on travel, but every job has stuff where you're oh, it's my least favorite part. Every pastor doesn't want to be tied to Sunday. I grew up as a pastor's kid. You don't get to do weekend stuff really. Because Saturday, your head's kind of in okay, I got to do this thing tomorrow. So every job has, and then the other thing is to remember I'm not deployed. The military, you'll be gone for 6 months, in Afghanistan. So when somebody goes, oh man, you had to travel. And I go, yeah, I spent a night in the embassy suites, and like in a bed
Right.
somebody else made. And then I drove home. I was going like 36 hours, did a podcast that was pretty fun, spoke twice. Yeah. So even consultants, if you're a consultant, you'll get a 6-month gig in Cleveland, and you might live in Tampa, and it's Monday through Thursday I have to be in Cleveland. So I try to remember that. I mean, it is a tension, definitely, but I try to, and I balance the days, and I'm careful about them, and so I'm probably gone, I don't know, 60 nights a year maybe, and so, but speaking is where I make the bulk of my income. So it's just a reality of it. And I'm not at a level where I can be everybody come here. That's
Right.
not how it works, dude. So
it's painting the realistic picture to your kids, not asking them to carry the guilt, not asking your spouse to carry the guilt, looking at the advantage.
well, and taking them with you.
Yeah.
They'll come on a week-long cruise with me. I'm doing a cruise with Sandy Patty this summer to Alaska and in Canada, and they'll come with me on that. My daughters have come on a couple. My daughter came with me to Tupelo a month ago. Jenny and I are going to Athens, Greece, for a speaking engagement.
Yeah,
And so
Suffer for Jesus
we went
in
to
Athens,
Hawaii
yeah.
last year for a speaking engagement. So it's not, they come when it makes sense, and then we figure it out, the rest of it. And I have the freedom now, because I've been doing it for a while, to say no to stuff I don't want to do. Good luck getting me in December. Good luck. I barely do anything in December. And so, and you figure it out.
So talk a little bit about at home. Okay, now you're home. You've got an office at home. So I know you well enough to know it's you're working not just when you're traveling. When you're home, you've got something. Talk a little bit about home and how do you, because I know for us, I would go to my job when I worked at the church. I could go there and then I would be home. Now Dad went to work. Now Dad's back home.
Yeah.
Then when I started working a lot from home, it was a weird transition for my kids.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, they're an age where it's not they're crying and I have to make them quiet. They're 12 and 14.
Right.
So that makes it different. I think more than anything, Jenny will be hey, the work day's over. So I probably don't work past 4 most days. So I try to be deliberate about that. I mean, I think the thing is you have to keep it in your office, because your laptop, you can work from anywhere.
Sure.
If you're not careful, your living room's your office, your kitchen's your office. And so I think I just try to be careful, hey, I do work in my office, and here's the things I need to do. And I'd say I'm still trying to figure it out, though. I mean, I've had my own business for about 5 years now, and it's every 6 months it radically changes. And you go, okay, here's this, here's this thing I need to do, and here's what it's going to look like. And you kind of refigure it out. I've started working with Bright Peak. You might
Yep.
And they've been awesome. And it means I go to Minnesota once a month, and I'm doing work with them, and that's new. And so every 6 months there's something that's very new, and I go, okay, let me figure out how this fits in. What does this look like? And so, yeah, I don't, but I don't work past 4. I try to, be deliberate about the weekends. There's been times when I've been more of a workaholic than I am right now. And I'm not under a book contract, so I'm not writing a book, so that makes it a little easier.
Gotcha. I've heard you say one time, and I loved this. You said, my kids are my kids, they're not my content. And I imagine that applies to Jenny too. Talk a little bit about that, because I've heard my kids say to me, are you about to post this?
Well, the older they get, the more invested they are in not being embarrassed on the internet.
Right.
But
Yep.
it's fun because my kids have that. They look at ideas and think about ideas now. So they'll say to me hey, look how big that dog's tongue is in that ad. That was a mistake, and you should post that. So they suggest stuff now. But I wouldn't take a picture of my daughter has crazy hair in the morning. I wouldn't take a picture of it and be look at this crazy hair. And so I always tease Josh Griffin, because Josh Griffin, I think he still does, names his kids numbers, because he doesn't want to share their names on the internet. And I always tease him about that, because that just feels to me when people used to say, don't tweet that you're at a restaurant, because cat burglars will see and they'll come rob your house. At this point, now I will say where Josh and I agree is my oldest daughter has Instagram, and we don't use her name. But that's only because I have followers, and I don't want her to get inundated with 100. I don't want a 14-year-old to have 100,000 followers. That's a suicide. So, but yeah, I think they're I'm trying to think. I'm sure there's been times when I've posted something that they're like, that's embarrassing, take that down. I mean, like, I'm not perfect at it, but I try to not, I don't know, especially like with ads. I see people do ads with their kids, and it's just like, it just feels like it's not something I'm into. We're like, oh, look, and the kid's the prop. Like, I don't want my kids to ever be a prop.
Right. Because it's so funny. They sense it at a really, really early age. Like, are you excited, Dad, to take this picture? Because
Yeah, or you try to recreate something funny they just did because you didn't get the right angle. And you're like, none of that is authentic. Like,
Right.
And so, I don't know. It's funny. I always think about photos. Somebody took that photo. Like, some of my favorite accounts where it's like boyfriends of Instagram. And it's like some boy standing on a restaurant table while the girl looks away. Like somebody took the photo. And so when you think about it that way, you're like, that's ridiculous. Like, somebody had to stage that kid. Like, I don't know. It's just dumb. I'm talking about social media today at this event we're at, which has the world's longest URL. Do you know the URL for this event?
No, what is it?
youthministryleadershipconference.com.
What?
I think, no, youthministryleadershipexchange.com. It's 31 letters. And they were like, it's weird. It was available. The URL is available. I was like, yeah, of course it was.
They broke all the rules at that point.
Yeah. 31 letters.
So, John, each Married People podcast, we always say we want to leave people with one simple thing. Kind of the tag of this podcast, we want to make marriage real, fun, and simple. What is one simple thing in terms of, I want you to speak to the person that's a dreamer and person that's supporting the dreamer.
Sure. I mean, I guess I'd just say fight in the morning. Like, I think the most misinterpreted verse in the Bible is like, don't let the sun go down your anger. That's just stupid. Like, you don't get smarter and better and more peaceful the later you stay up. Like, you don't, like, at 3 a.m. isn't really when you come into your groove. Like, Jesus is 100% okay with you being like, I love you. Like, we're in a disagreement. Tomorrow when we have coffee and like we have breakfast and the sun's shining and like life feels new, we'll finish this discussion. Like, we don't have to finish. Like, it's so, I just think that's one of those like lazy premarital counseling things that you were told that I just don't think is true. So I would say fight in the morning.
Fight in the morning, because then you've got the rest of the day to figure it out.
Well, yeah, and you've got space, and
new.
like versus like at 2 a.m. you're trying to have this emotional, like, I don't think anything good happens. Like, so I would say that, yeah.
Like, find the right time to have these conversations.
Yeah, I mean, fight in the morning is way more catchy, but.
Fight in the morning, I like that, than a good time, because if we started fighting in the morning, it would not go good for the Lowe's, because I'm a little like, I just don't need to talk in the morning.
I'm saying after coffee.
After coffee, yeah.
Not before. Like, I'm not saying 6 a.m. Like, it can be 9 a.m. But I just think that's one of those things that always cracks me up when Christians are like, we got to finish this tonight. I'm like, nope.
Nope, because this is not going to finish.
It doesn't work well.
No.
Like, it's not, no. So that's what I'd say.
So how would you encourage people right now? Like, what's the benefit of this? Like, we're saying support each other, create space for each other. I think you've talked a lot of great things about expectations of seasons, about what's going to happen, finding the pros, communicating those pros, not depending too much. Have you seen this? Who's the best at this? I know you guys are great at this. Who's another couple that you would say, leave us with a story of somebody you go, wow, they're really good at this? Because you said you've looked at other marriages and said, hey.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, I think back to like neighbors. I've got some neighbors, the Murrays, and I think they're good at that. Like, the wife is very much, she's an artist, she's a painter, she's a dreamer, and the husband is analytical, like runs his own company, like a serious guy, but not serious in the sense that you're like, oh, that guy doesn't laugh. Like, very funny, very down to earth, but they're very different. And, I saw them do an amazing renovation of their back porch, and it wasn't like this war zone. Like, they figured it out. And so I like when I can watch, I don't like when I say dreamer, dreamer doesn't have to mean like your wife starts a cake pop company. It can mean like you renovate a bathroom and don't murder each other. And so like I've seen my neighbors, the Murrays, do that well, where they're very different. And I feel like she gets to be really loud and like and who she is, and he gets to be who he is, and it doesn't feel like those two are at odds. I mean, the benefit of this is, when you do this, 1 + 1 equals like 1 billion. Like, that's the power of marriage. Like, 1 + 1 should equal 2, but if you do this, it's so much bigger than that. I've seen somebody who's not a Christian say that marriage is like the best life hack. Like, when you're married to a partner that you guys are on the same page, it's like the best life hack. And I thought that was an interesting way to say it.
because you just miss out, right?
Oh yeah,
You
there's
miss
so
out.
much. There's so much there that you're like, it's another person who knows you, you know, and is invested in you, and you know, like that's what it's kind of reminds me of, like when, you know, in college people date and then not get married, and it's like if you dated all 4 years, that's the only person who holds those memories, and you no longer have access to them. Like I remember there was this dude that I went to college with. He spent like 6 months in Europe with his girlfriend, and then they broke up, and it's like the other person that holds that piece you don't have access to anymore. Like that's a bummer. So on the plus side, when you have a marriage that lasts, that person, like just even private jokes that you build up, just even reactions, just like it can be stupid stuff. Like I always joke, like Jenny's the only person I get to be petty with, that I can be like, that thing was so dumb. Like those people we just met were crazy town. And she'd be like, they were, you know, like, so like you have all that, it's collective. I think you miss out on that when the other person has to be smaller than they really are.
I love all of this. We're going to so rip off all these bottom lines and
Great.
do other podcasts just on based on like
So funny.
things, because I'm thinking, wow, they don't have access. I don't have access to those memories, and you just think, and we just, not to end on a bummer, but just went to a funeral with people we've been dear friends with for over 20 years, and they're sitting up front, and they've gone through their shares of tough times, but her siblings have both divorced, and I'm watching the moment where she really needed support because her dad had passed away.
Yeah.
She's the only one sitting there with somebody that has access to all those memories that she had from their wedding and different things. And I just think, wow, just to have another half of us is just, it's a rich thing.
It's a big deal. So I think that's the joy of when you kind of live this way.
Cool. Jon, thank you very much, buddy.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us for the Married People podcast. We hope that today's episode helped you realize that marriage can be a little easier than you think. And if you enjoyed today's episode, we would love for you to subscribe to the podcast through your Apple Podcast app or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And while you're there, we would love for you to leave us a review. Your review will help us make this podcast better and help get these conversations in front of more couples who need to hear them. And finally, if you want to check out Jon's latest book, Finish, and if you want to check out his brand new podcast, Creative Slide, you can visit his website at acuff.me or visit our show notes at marriedpeople.org/podcast. We'll have links to all of his stuff there. Until next time, thanks for listening.